Good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent, and we have a treat today. One of the top Reddit articles is a balanced reporting of a recent Trump rally or set of rallies and speeches that Donald Trump has given. Now, what's perhaps not too surprising, maybe just more disappointing than surprising, in order to get this somewhat more fact-based coverage as opposed to some of the pretty much crazy talk we've been dealing with the last few weeks, we had to go to Australia. abc.net.au. Donald Trump promises largest deportation operation in American history if elected president. Okay, for all of you who maybe have had your head under a rock or you just listen to lefty talking points, that's a feature, not a bug, for the people that pay attention to Donald Trump. The people who like Donald Trump as president have this weird, I'm gonna feed it to you straight. People who support Donald Trump tend to have this crazy idea that if you're in America, you should be here and not break the law. Now, if you want to take an open borders position and you want to advocate for that, go for it. But until you manage to change the law, the principle of civil obedience to the rule of law should be upheld. It's a bad idea to have people here who are not here legally. And let me explain what I mean by that. There's a bunch of politically sensitive labels that we can apply: migrants and immigrants and undocumented, blah, 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 blah. There's a legal technical term called illegal alien. In other words, you are either a citizen or a resident or an alien. Some conditions will allow an alien to be here on a short-term basis for legal reasons, in which case you would be a legal alien and you would have some kind of waiver or some kind of asylum hearing or something along those lines. But your status would need to be resolved to either becoming a resident of some sort, eventually a citizen, or to leave the country. This is how countries work. This isn't rocket science. Anyone who's not here legally is a criminal, and I feel like a crazy person for having to say that out loud, but that's just the truth. If you come here to America, if you are not here legally, you are not entitled to welfare benefits. So either you pretend to be here legally in order to get welfare benefits, which is itself a form of fraud and it's a crime, or you get a job for which you either get paid under the table, in which case you're avoiding taxes, or you commit identity theft and use a different social security number that's not yours because you don't have one because you're not here legally, in which case you've committed identity theft. So in order to claim the money so that you could pay taxes and thereby not be guilty of tax evasion. Regardless of your citizenship status, regardless of what label you want to put on that citizenship status, it is impossible for a person to live here without a legal status and not break the law. Now that sets aside all of the concerns about illegal immigrants or illegal aliens, to use the technical term, who might be members of drug cartels or gangs or 1,001 other high-risk profiles. Okay. So right off the bat, this headline is factually true. This is something Donald Trump said. And for people on the left, they go, no, we can't have that. How dare he? And the people on the right are sitting there saying, finally, a politician who's willing to try and actually tackle this serious problem. Congrats, ABC, your headline is factual. Good job. Speaking at a rally in Reno, Mr. Trump also called the U.S. President Joe Biden a low IQ individual and the worst, most incompetent, and most corrupt president in the history of the United States. Yeah, that's what he does to political opponents. In the 2016 cycle, Donald Trump's primary contender, his main contender in the Republican primary, was Ted Cruz. He accused Ted Cruz's dad of having killed John F. Kennedy or been involved in that somehow. Donald Trump says a lot of crap. He tries to put people off their guard. He calls people names. That's who he is. For people who like him, they don't care about this name-calling stuff. That's beside the point. For people who don't like him, they already don't like him. So this kind of name-calling goes, look at him, immature, blah, 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 blah. This doesn't move the needle one way or the other, but it's factually reporting. That is what he said. One day earlier, he said undocumented immigrants were poisoning the blood of our country. I don't love that imagery, but I don't see Donald Trump presenting an ethno-nationalist agenda. I don't see him advancing any kind of race-based agenda. And I say this because the allusion to the blood of our country ties back to people who did overtly, politicians who did overtly put forth race-based policy and commentary, i.e. Nazis. They believed in a master race, a superior race. Ironically enough, so did the Japanese, who also believed they were the master race. So it would have been kind of fun to watch them duke that out, but we never got there. So set that aside. The point is, there are people in power over time who sometimes try and talk about the actual genetic composition of the people of their country and try and make policy accordingly. I don't see that anywhere in his policy. I have not looked up the context of this quote. Maybe I will. Maybe we'll do a follow-up on this. But I see it as a one-off or a failed set of imagery that he's going for a particular thing. Okay, double down. Now, this is one thing, and I will say this, and both parties do this, and it drives me batty. It is politically convenient to pretend that problems started the minute your opponent got into office, and discount anything that happened before, especially that happened from you or from your party. Republicans and Democrats have worked together to create a circumstance whereby we have a huge number of illegal aliens in America. That is an existing problem, that it is a festering boil on the skin that has to be lanced at some point. But because no one wants to make a mess or cause that pain or deal with that issue, they ignore it. And sometimes even do things to make it worse. So we end up with situations where here, Donald Trump, let's bag on him here, given the unprecedented millions of Biden illegal aliens, he's trying to label the illegal alien problem as a Biden problem. It's not. It has been an issue for decades, for a very long time. And it's a problem that has persisted across multiple administrations, both parties. It's a problem of federal policy. It's a problem of enforcement. It's a problem of not only some of the laws are poor, but also the laws that are written are not always enforced. There are some perverse incentives that go into this that cause the backers and lobbyists of both parties to be at least quietly pro-illegal immigration. It's a whole topic in and of itself. But it is specious to argue as a politician that this problem was wholly or completely or in any way the fault of your opponent and nobody else. You're letting off a huge chunk of the politicians off the hook, and it's just wrong. Okay, terminate every open border policy of the Biden administration. I assume he's talking about executive orders. Executive orders are like the wind. They blow back and forth. They don't carry a lot of weight because they can be unwound by the next guy just as easily. The Alien Enemies Act will be invoked. I don't know the details of that legislation. I think it's a good idea to get rid of illegal aliens, especially criminal illegal aliens. In other words, if you're a gang member or a drug dealer or a cartel member and you're in America and you're not here legally and you don't have valid citizenship status, you should be deported. That shouldn't be a controversial statement. A bunch of other people should also be deported, but how about we start with common ground? How about we start with violent felons? Would you agree with me that America would be a better place with fewer foreign nationals who have no residency here, who are known and or convicted violent felons? Would we be better off if those people were removed from the country? Call me old-fashioned. I think the answer is yes. If you don't, help me understand how you can argue in good faith for a civil society, because you're basically saying people who flout the most serious criminal laws should be given a pass. I can't go there with you. Help me understand how you have that worldview, because it makes no sense to me. And this is again, it kind of comes back to the world is bigger than politics. And sometimes politicians, one of their favorite games is to take anything good going on and try and make it their fault, and anything bad to try and make it someone else's fault. The simple truth is there should not be a correlation between who's in the White House and how the stock market does. The stock market is or should be the expression of value of the American economy, and the American economy should be more free of direct government manipulation than it is. This is my 2 cents. So, if it's free, then it should, from a statistical perspective, be free to vary independently. There should not be a correlation between whatever's going on over here in the government, whatever's going on over here in the marketplace. You could have great governance with great policy that enables the market to function beautifully well, and have a natural disaster like the Dust Bowl in the 1930s that decimates certain sectors of our industry or economy, or a foreign war or something going on where supply chains are disrupted, where it's outside of our ability to control. And so the market has a downside. Policy and market should be free to vary on their own. However, when Donald Trump was elected, there were plenty of people on the left who said, the market will never recover. We're all going to go into a depression and everybody's going to hate it. And things ended up going pretty well, or at least the value went up. There are some who argue that the wild swings in value, the wild fluctuations in the value of the stock market are a problem in and of themselves. In other words, the fact that we have a market whose value swings so dramatically is not a sign of a healthy economy. My 2 cents. Anyway, and so arguing that we'll just be in a crash is no good. However, here we are, and Mr. Trump apparently predicted if Biden won, the markets would crash, and they didn't. Okay, whatever. And then he said he bemoaned that the soaring U.S. stock market only makes rich people richer. So whatever. I mean, I have very little time for professional financial analysts who make predictions about the stock market because they're wrong most of the time. I have even less patience for politicians who make predictions about the stock market because generally they really don't know what they're talking about. Biden's inflation catastrophe is demolishing your savings and ravaging your dreams. I agree that the inflation is a problem. And again, where I'm going to go after Trump here and say he's not right, the inflationary pressures that we are feeling did not start when Biden took over. Donald Trump spent a lot of money during his term, pre-COVID and post-COVID. When government spends huge amounts of money and prints a bunch of money, that money comes out in inflationary pressure as it works its way through the system. That's how inflation works. It's like saying water rolls downhill, water flows downhill. That's reality. However, conveniently, there was an election and now your opponent is in charge. And as inflation ramps up, it's ramping up under your opponent's watch. And so here is a cudgel we can beat him up with. But the Republicans generally, and Donald Trump specifically, have been horrendously fiscally irresponsible for, again, decades. This is not a new problem. It's particularly painful right now, but it's not one side's fault or the other. Do I think Donald Trump might do some things that would help with inflation? Maybe. I mean, the ship has already kind of sailed. We have, I forget the stat, but something like 80% of all US dollars in circulation, not printed money, but digitized currencies. So basically all of your money supply, 80% of that money supply was created after 2020. In other words, the available pool of money quintupled in a couple of years. You can't do that and not have inflation. It just it cannot happen. So yeah, we got some inflation to deal with. Now, let's talk about what that means. Inflation stinks when the cost of goods that you purchase goes up. But inflation should also drive wages up accordingly. The fact of the matter is, I make six figures at my day job. Great, fantastic, impressive. Pretty good for a goober like me. I'm pretty happy about it, okay? That six figures is not worth as much as someone who made, so I make in the 100 to 200 range, okay? Someone who made $150,000 a year in 1984 had a heck of a lot more buying power than someone who makes it today. The equivalent salary is probably more like $600,000 from 1984 to today, 40 some odd years later, okay? But that's how inflation works. Costs go up. A Big Mac costs a heck of a lot more than it did in the 80s, but the average value paid to a worker as a wage has also gone up. So if you're looking at quality of life, cost of living, etc., there is a balancing act between how much you are able to command in the marketplace. Labor is a cost input in the market. So the cost of labor goes up as the price that can be commanded, and the cost of the other inputs go up as well. It's more about the relationship between the two. When you have costs of everything jump really, really quickly, you have a disparity there where your income hasn't moved. People might get a raise once a year. They might change jobs every couple of years. They might change careers every couple of decades. And so their income does not fluctuate very quickly. But inside of a year or maybe two, to have everything be 20% more expensive, well, your income didn't jump 20%. So if your income jumped 3%, 4%, great. But over that same 2-year period, the cost of everything you buy went up 20%, you feel relatively poorer. This is how inflation works. I'm hopefully not breaking too much ground, but it might be a useful explanation. And that's the end of the article. Now, the last thing I want to do, because I have a few extra minutes today, is I want to see what Reddit has to say about this. Because again, it's a pretty fair piece of reporting. So why are they freaking out about it? Immigrants in Florida will vote for you. They're the good ones. He's not hurting the people he needs to be hurting. It's odd. I'm married to a German immigrant. The amount of offhanded comments from white middle-class people we know about the immigrants who then say, oh, you're different, aka white. By the way, that's putting words in their mouth. When we call them out on it is infuriating. Trump's behavior and comments last time put her visa at risk if they had actually done the things he wanted. They don't understand who all is affected here. There's a her these comments are referencing. I didn't see it in the article. I don't know what they're saying, but the principle can still be discussed. One, there's a heck of a lot of mind reading that goes on in modern politics, where you hear someone use a phrase or a word or make a statement, and you feel entitled to reach into their mind and know what they meant by that, or know how they feel about that. And this has some insidious roots, but one of them is hate crimes and hate speech legislation. Okay, if I'm a mugger and I whack you over the head because I want your wallet, that's a crime. If you're black, you're just as whacked over the head. If you're white as a victim, you're just as whacked over the head. The nature of the crime didn't change. If you are white, and I really hate white people, you're still just as whacked over the head. It makes no material difference in the nature of the crime to call it a hate crime, except that it begins to lay a legal foundation for subjective interpretation, for subjective tweaking, where some animals can be more equal than others, where some members of the political process or the polity in general can be punished more sternly than others. It's the beginning of a multi-tiered justice system. It's the beginning of the end of the justice system. It is a mess. And it feeds into this broad understanding of saying, hey, you're different, meaning we're white. Well, what about this simple, let me just go ahead and assume, she says, I'm married to a German immigrant. What if we went ahead and just assumed, for argument's sake, that her husband, yeah, he wanted, okay, we'll call it, that the spouse, the German spouse, immigrated legally and was a legal resident and married a citizen and is therefore allowed to be here in the eyes of the law, making an A to B comparison between a person in that circumstance versus someone who sneaks across the border or gets caught and then released with a court date, 15 years in the future. And while they're here, they are committing identity theft or tax evasion or any one of a number of other things to try and live, because they're not here legally, so they're on the edge of the society and they're possibly being victimized by a bunch of different people, whatever. I mean, it's a messy situation. Those are different. Therefore, when someone says, oh, you're different, they mean you're law-abiding. We're talking about people who are not law-abiding. Just because you're an immigrant and they're an immigrant does not make your cases the same. And just because you're white and they're a different race does not make the cases different. Race is not the driving factor of this conversation. But for the left, it is race now, race tomorrow, race forever. This is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. This has been my Reddit rant. Good luck out there.